Is that what you're wearing? My mother asked loudly enough for 3 tables to turn. Why did she have to say it now, here in the middle of Lila's wedding? Why did it feel like she wanted them to hear? And why was I suddenly aware of the envelope in my hand, like it weighed more than the dress itself? It looks donated, Diane added, smiling as if it were a joke. A few people laughed. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because inside that thin envelope was a contract with my name on it, one I didn't remember agreeing to like this. Then Lila walked straight past my mother and wrapped her arms around me. And in that moment, I knew this wedding wasn't just a wedding anymore. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from and what time it is where you are. I read every comment even when I don't reply, and if you've ever felt small in your own family, you'll understand why I'm telling this. 2 weeks before the wedding, I was sitting cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by dresses that didn't belong to me. They were all borrowed or secondhand, some from a consignment shop downtown, a few from a friend who worked in wardrobe styling. I had narrowed it down to one, a soft ivory dress with a simple neckline and a structure that made it feel more expensive than it was. It fit well. It didn't scream for attention. It felt like me. My phone buzzed against the hardwood floor. Did you find something appropriate? My mother asked the second I picked up. There was no greeting. There never was. I found a dress, I said. It's fine. Fine isn't the word I would use for a wedding like this, Diane replied. Do you know who's going to be there? Lila's fiancé's family is established. I leaned back against the couch and looked at the dress again. I'm not part of the wedding party. I'm just a guest. You're my daughter, she said sharper now. You represent this family whether you like it or not. That word represent always came with a cost. I'll look presentable, I said, keeping my voice even. There was a pause, then a sigh that sounded rehearsed. I don't understand why you insist on doing things the hard way, Kennedy. You have options. You just refuse to use them. Options. She meant money. Or more specifically, her money with strings attached I had learned to recognize long before I could name them. I'm fine, I repeated. She let out a quiet laugh. You always say that right before you make things more difficult for yourself. I didn't respond. There wasn't a version of this conversation that ended with her understanding me. After we hung up, I sat there for a while, staring at the dress like it had somehow become part of the argument. It wasn't just about fabric or price. It was about control, what I chose, how I showed up, what I allowed myself to need. I had stopped asking her for anything years ago. A text came in a few minutes later. Marcus, you still coming to the wedding? Me, yeah. Marcus, good. Mom's already stressed. Don't add to it. I stared at the message, then typed back. Me, I'm not the one planning a $90K wedding. There was a delay before he replied. Marcus, it's handled. That phrasing caught my attention. Me, what does that mean? Another pause. Marcus, just... Everything's covered. Don't worry about it. I frowned. Covered by who? Our family wasn't exactly known for financial transparency, but this felt different. The scale of the wedding alone didn't match what I knew about our actual situation. My mother cared about appearances, yes, but she was also careful, strategic. She didn't spend like that unless she believed someone else was absorbing the risk. I pushed the thought aside and stood up, smoothing the dress over my hands. It wasn't the first time something didn't quite add up. It was just the first time I felt like I might be connected to it. Later that night, I opened my laptop to double-check my own finances. Rent was paid. My savings were steady. No unusual withdrawals. No alerts. Everything looked normal. But that didn't ease the feeling sitting in my chest. It brought me back to something small, forgettable at the time. A few months ago, my mother had asked me to sign some paperwork. It's just a formality, she had said, sliding a folder across the table. Something for the venue deposit. They need an additional name on file. I remember flipping through it quickly. It looked standard. Legal language I didn't fully absorb, but nothing that stood out as dangerous. She had been impatient, tapping her nails against the table. "We're on a deadline, Kennedy," so I signed. I didn't ask for copies. I didn't think I needed them. At the time, it felt like helping. Now, sitting in my quiet apartment, I realized I couldn't remember exactly what I had agreed to, and that bothered me more than it should have. The next morning, I called the venue listed on Lila's invitation. "Hi, I'm calling about an event booking," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Gutierrez Brooks' wedding." There was a brief pause on the line. "Yes. How can I help you?" "I just wanted to confirm who the primary financial contact is on file." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm sorry I can't release that information without authorization." "Of course," I said quickly. "I understand." I hung up, but the hesitation in her voice stayed with me. That afternoon, I pulled up the email threads I still had from my mother. Most of them were logistics times fittings guest counts. Nothing about contracts, nothing about finances. It was too clean, like something had been intentionally left out. I sat back in my chair, the unease sharpening into something more focused. If my name was attached to anything beyond what I thought I signed, I needed to know, not from my mother, not from Marcus, from someone who was actually bound by the paperwork. I opened a new tab and searched for the attorney my mother had used for years, Harold Green. His office was still listed. Same address, same number. I hesitated for a moment before dialing. When the receptionist answered, I introduced myself. "Hi, this is Kennedy Gutierrez. I'm calling about some documents I signed a few months ago related to a wedding contract. I need copies." There was a soft clicking sound on the other end, typing maybe. "Do you have an appointment, Ms. Gutierrez?" "No, but my name should be on file." Another pause. Then more carefully this time, "Yes. I do see your name here." Something in her tone shifted. "Would you be available to come in tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my grip tightening around the phone. "I can be there." "Good," she replied. "Mr. Green will need to speak with you directly." When the call ended, I didn't move right away. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like this wasn't a routine request. Like there was something in those documents that couldn't be explained over the phone. I looked across the room at the dress draped over the back of the chair. For the first time, it didn't feel like the problem. It felt like a distraction. Because whatever I had signed was still sitting somewhere with my name on it. And tomorrow, I was finally going to see exactly what that meant. The next morning, I got to Harold Green's office 10 minutes early. It was the same building I remembered from years ago. Muted gray carpet, quiet hallways, the kind of place where nothing looked urgent on the surface. I had been there before with my mother, sitting in a chair that was always slightly too low, listening to conversations I wasn't meant to fully understand. This time, I walked in alone. Ms. Gutierrez, the receptionist, said, her tone polite but measured. "He's expecting you." That word "expecting" landed differently than it should have. I followed her down the hallway past closed doors and framed certificates until she knocked once and opened a door without waiting for a response. "Come in." Harold Green looked older than I remembered. Not dramatically, but enough that the lines around his eyes were more defined, his posture slightly heavier. He stood when I entered, offering a brief nod. "Kennedy," he said. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I replied, taking the seat across from his desk. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't need to understand something." He didn't smile. He didn't pretend this was casual. Instead, he reached for a folder already set aside on his desk. I assumed as much. That was the second time someone had said something like that to me in less than 24 hours. He opened the folder slowly as if giving me time to change my mind. "You're here about the documents you signed in March," he said. "Yes." He slid a stack of papers toward me. Not copies originals, or at least certified duplicates. Thick structured, filled with language that was far more specific than what I remembered. I flipped to the first page. My name was there. Kennedy Gutierrez. Not as a witness, not as a secondary contact. Primary financial guarantor. I felt something in my chest tighten, but I kept my face still. "That's not what I agreed to," I said. Harold didn't argue. "I understand why you'd say that." I turned a page, then another. The contract outlined obligations in precise terms, payment guarantees, liability clauses, conditions triggered by vendor disputes, cancellations, or material disruption of event execution. It was structured to protect the venue, the vendors, and most importantly, the primary contracting party, who wasn't me. "Where is my mother in this?" I asked, my voice quieter now. He pointed to a section halfway down the page. "Diane Gutierrez, event coordinator, family representative, not financially liable." I let out a slow breath reading it again just to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting. "She's not responsible," I asked. "Not under this agreement. But she's the one who arranged everything." "Yes. And she had me sign this as a formality." Harold's expression didn't change. "That's what she told you." I looked up at him. "You were there." "I was present," he said carefully. "But I cannot speak to what was explained to you outside of this office. That was the language of someone protecting himself, not lying, just stepping back." I flipped further into the contract. There it was, the clause that made my stomach drop. "In the event of non-payment dispute or reputational harm impacting contracted services, the guarantor assumes full financial responsibility for all outstanding balances, fees, and damages." "How much are we talking about?" I asked. Harold didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for another document in the folder and placed it beside the contract. An itemized estimate. Venue, $38,000. Catering, $22,000. Floral and design, $11, $500 photography and media, $8, $200 additional services, $10,000 plus. I did the math without meaning to. $90,000. "Is this final?" I asked. "No," he said. "It's projected. Final costs could exceed that depending on execution." Execution. Like this was a business deal. Like I wasn't sitting there realizing I had been placed at the center of it without knowing. "I never agreed to this," I said again, more firmly now. Harold nodded once. "The question isn't whether you believe you agreed," he said. "The question is whether the agreement can be challenged." That was the first time the conversation shifted from explanation to strategy. How, I asked. He leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "If you can demonstrate that you were misled about the nature of the document, or that material information was withheld, there may be grounds to contest your liability." "Misled," I repeated, "like being told it was a venue formality." "Yes. And not being told I'd be personally responsible for everything that would be relevant." I looked back down at the contract. My signature was there. Clean. Clear. Undeniable. "You're telling me this is enforceable," I said. "I'm telling you it's valid on its face," he corrected. "But validity can be challenged under certain conditions." I sat there in silence for a moment. "So what happens if I do nothing?" Harold didn't hesitate this time. "If the event proceeds without issue, nothing may happen. And if something goes wrong, you would be financially responsible." For a second, the room felt smaller. Something going wrong didn't sound hypothetical anymore. Not after the way my mother operated. Not after Marcus said everything was handled. Not after the tension I had already felt building around this wedding. I closed the folder slowly. "Do you think she knew exactly what she was doing?" I asked. Harold met my eyes. "I think your mother is very detail-oriented," he said. That wasn't an answer, but it was close enough. I stood up, the weight of the folder heavier than it should have been. "I need copies of everything I said." "They're already prepared," he replied, sliding a sealed envelope toward me. Of course they were. Like this moment had been anticipated, like I was the last person to catch up. I took the envelope and headed for the door, but stopped with my hand on the handle. "One more question," I said, turning back slightly. "If I challenge this?" "What does that look like?" Harold's voice was calm. "It would likely involve formal notice, potential legal action, and depending on timing, public exposure of the agreement." Public. At a wedding built on appearances, that word carried weight. Would it stop the event, I asked. It could. I nodded once. Then I walked out. By the time I reached the parking lot, the air felt sharper, like everything had come into focus at once. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, about being positioned quietly, deliberately, as the person who would absorb the consequences if anything went wrong. And for the first time, I understood why. Because I was the one they thought wouldn't fight back. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. Inside it was everything I needed to prove what had been done, but also everything that tied me to it. My phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. I hesitated for a second before opening it. "Lila, hi. This is Lila. I think we need to talk. Alone." I stared at the screen, then back at the envelope. Whatever I thought this situation was, it had just gotten bigger. I didn't text Lila back right away. Instead, I drove. Not anywhere specific, just far enough from the office that I could think without feeling like someone was watching me catch up to a truth everyone else already understood. By the time I got home, the envelope was still sitting on the passenger seat, unopened since I left the parking lot. I had already seen enough to know what was inside. Copies of everything. My name in places it shouldn't have been. My phone buzzed again. Lila. "I know this is strange, but please, before the wedding." I read it twice. Then I typed back. "Me tomorrow morning. Somewhere quiet." She replied almost immediately with a cafe I didn't recognize, north side out of the way. Intentional. I set the phone down and finally picked up the envelope again. This time, I went through everything carefully. Dates, clauses, addendums. There were multiple signatures from my mother, some as event coordinator, others as family representative. Always adjacent to mine. Always positioned so that responsibility landed in one place. Mine. But what stood out wasn't just the contract. It was the pattern. Email printouts attached in the back. Vendor confirmations. Payment structures. Every time a risk was introduced, late payment penalties, cancellation fees, liability shifts, my name appeared. Every time something was framed as coordination or planning, my mother's name appeared. It wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. The next evening, I went to my mother's house. I didn't tell her I was coming. The lights were on, music playing softly inside something classical she always put on when she wanted things to feel controlled, elevated. I knocked once and let myself in. "Kennedy," she called from the kitchen. You could at least text before she stopped when she saw my face. Not angry, not emotional, just focused. "We need to talk," I said. Marcus was already there, sitting at the island with a drink in his hand. He glanced between us, reading the shift in the room before anyone spoke. "This isn't a good time," my mother said lightly, reaching for a glass. "We're finalizing seating arrangements." I placed the folder on the counter. It's exactly the right time. She didn't touch it. What is this? She asked. You tell me. Marcus leaned forward slightly, curiosity pulling him in despite himself. Diane finally opened the folder, flipping through the first few pages with a calm that felt practiced. You went to Harold, she said, not looking up. Yes. A small pause. Then she set the papers down. Well, she said, smoothing the edge of the counter with her palm. I'm glad you're taking an interest. I stared at her. That's what you call this, Kennedy? She said, her tone shifting just enough to sound patient. You signed those documents willingly. You told me they were a formality. They were necessary. That's not the same thing. Marcus exhaled quietly, like he'd been holding his breath too long. Can we not do this right now? He muttered. The wedding's in a week. I turned to him. Do you even know what she had me sign? His jaw tightened. I know you were helping. Helping. The word landed harder than I expected. I'm the financial guarantor, I said. Silence. Marcus, what for everything? I continued. Venue. Vendors. Any penalties? If anything goes wrong, it's on me. He looked at our mother. That's not, it's structured. Diane cut in smoothly to ensure the event proceeds without interruption. That's not what I asked, he said, sharper now. She sighed, like this was all becoming unnecessarily complicated. Your sister has stable finances, she said. No existing liabilities. It made sense. I felt something shift inside me, not sudden, not explosive. Just clear. You used me, I said. I involved you, she corrected, without telling me what I was agreeing to. You didn't ask. There it was. Simple. Clean. Final. Marcus ran a hand over his face. Mom. This is not a crisis. Diane continued, turning back to me. The wedding will go smoothly. Nothing will trigger those clauses. And if it doesn't, I asked. It will. That's not an answer. Her expression tightened slightly. You're being dramatic. No, I said quietly. I'm being informed. That seemed to irritate her more than anything else. You always do this, she said. You take something manageable and turn it into a problem. I didn't create this problem. You're about to. The room went still. That wasn't a warning. It was a threat. Marcus looked between us again, the confidence he'd had earlier gone now. What happens if she pulls out? He asked. Diane didn't hesitate. She won't. I held her gaze. You're sure about that? Another pause. This one longer. More measured. You wouldn't embarrass this family like that, she said. It wasn't a question. It was an assumption. The same one everything else had been built on. I reached into my bag and pulled out a second set of papers, copies I had printed myself that afternoon. I'm not here to argue, I said, placing them beside the originals. I'm here to make sure you understand something. Diane's eyes flicked down briefly, then back up. If I'm the guarantor, I continued, then I have the authority to review question, and if necessary, withdraw from any agreement that puts me at risk under false pretenses. Marcus straightened slightly. Can she do that? He asked. Diane didn't answer right away, which told me enough. You signed, she said finally. That's what matters. Not if the signature was obtained under misleading conditions. The words felt unfamiliar in my mouth, but steady. I had practiced them in the car. I watched her process that. Not emotionally, strategically. You're overestimating your position, she said. Am I? Another silence. This one heavier, because for the first time she wasn't controlling the direction of the conversation. I picked up the folder again. I'm meeting with Lila tomorrow, I added. That got her attention. Why, she asked. For what purpose, I guess we'll both find out. Her expression changed then just slightly. Not panic. but calculation adjusting. "Be careful what you say," she said. "This isn't just about you." "I know," I replied. "That's the problem." Marcus pushed his chair back, the sound sharp against the floor. "This is insane," he muttered. "It's a wedding, not a courtroom." I looked at him. "It's both," I said. Because somewhere between contracts and expectations, it had become one. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another message from Lila. I didn't check it right away. I didn't need to. Whatever she was about to say was going to confirm everything I had just seen. I got to the cafe 10 minutes early. It was tucked between a bookstore and a florist, quiet, almost deliberately unnoticeable. The kind of place people chose when they didn't want to be overheard or recognized. Lila was already there. She wasn't dressed like a bride preparing for a wedding week. No polished hair, no careful makeup. Just a loose sweater, her hair pulled back, a coffee untouched in front of her. She looked tired. Not physically. Something deeper than that. "You came," she said when she saw me. "I wanted to hear this directly," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. Not through assumptions." She nodded once like she expected that answer. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It felt like both of us were deciding how much truth we were ready to put on the table. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "I didn't know how to start this conversation," she said, "so I figured I'd just show you." She turned the screen toward me. An email thread. Subject line: payment structure. Final adjustment: the sender, my mother. I leaned closer, reading. Diane had written to the wedding planner and several vendors outlining revised payment terms. She emphasized flexibility and security, mentioning that a guarantor had been secured to ensure all obligations would be met regardless of unforeseen disruptions. My name appeared twice, not as a suggestion, as a confirmed detail. I sat back slowly. "She never told you?" Lila asked. "No," I said. "She told me I was signing a venue formality." Lila let out a quiet breath like that confirmed something she had already suspected. "I didn't know the full structure at first either," she admitted, "but I noticed things didn't line up. Like what vendors kept referencing someone else when we discussed payment guarantees," she said. "Not your mother, not me. And you didn't ask." Did she said. "I just didn't get a straight answer." That sounded familiar. She tapped the screen again, scrolling further down the thread. "There's more," she said. Another email. This one shorter. From Diane to the planner. "If anything escalates, the guarantor will absorb the exposure. We need to ensure continuity of event execution." I read it twice, then a third time. "Exposure," I repeated quietly. Lila nodded. "That's the word that made me pause." "It's not a word you use unless you expect risk," I said. "Exactly." I looked back at her. "So why are you telling me this now?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I don't want to get married under a lie," she said, "and I don't want someone else paying for something they didn't agree to." That answer landed clean. No hesitation, no performance, just clarity. I believed her. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She looked down at her coffee for a second before answering. "I've been thinking about that," she said. "A lot." Her fingers tightened slightly around the cup, even though she hadn't taken a sip. "I could walk away," she continued. "Cancel everything. But that doesn't fix what was done to you." "No," I said. "It just shifts the fallout." "And I don't want that either," she added. We sat there for a moment, both of us aware of how carefully this had to be handled. "This wedding isn't just a wedding anymore," she said quietly. "It's leverage." I nodded. "Then we use it," I said. She looked up at me, studying my face like she was making a final decision. "I was hoping you'd say that." There was no excitement in her voice, No sense of drama. Just resolve. I don't want to blindside anyone, she said. But I also don't want this buried after the fact. Then it has to happen in a way that can't be dismissed, I replied. In public, she said. Yes. She leaned back slightly, processing that. That will humiliate your mother. She humiliated me first, I said. And more importantly, she assumed I wouldn't respond. Lila nodded slowly. What about the legal side, she asked. I spoke to Harold Green, I said. There are grounds to challenge the contract if it was signed under misleading conditions. And was it yes? Can you prove that I thought about the emails, the way the documents were presented, the absence of clear disclosure? Yes, I said. Especially if those emails are part of the record. She gave a small, almost relieved exhale. Good, she said. We both knew what that meant. This wasn't just about exposing behavior. It was about protecting myself in a way that held up legally. I'll bring everything I have, she said. Emails, confirmations, vendor messages. I'll bring the contract and copies, I replied. And we do it at the wedding, she said. Not a question. A plan. I nodded. There's one more thing, she added. What? She hesitated for the first time since I'd sat down. My parents don't know about any of this, she said. They trust your mother. Completely. That's part of why this works, I said. No one expects it. She gave a short, humorless smile. No, she agreed. They don't. Silence settled between us again, but it felt different now. Not uncertain. Focused. I reached for my bag, pulling out the envelope from yesterday. I have copies of everything, I said, placing it on the table. She looked at it, then back at me. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked. It wasn't doubt. It was respect. A final chance to step back. I thought about my mother standing in that kitchen telling me I wouldn't embarrass the family. I thought about the contract with my name attached to $90,000 of risk. I thought about the way she said I hadn't asked. I'm not doing this to embarrass anyone, I said. I'm doing this so I'm not the one left paying for something I didn't choose. Lila nodded. That's fair. We both stood at the same time, the conversation settling into something unspoken but understood. As we walked toward the door, she paused. One more thing, she said. I turned back. If this goes the way we think it will, the ceremony might not happen as planned. I held her gaze. That's your decision, I said. She nodded once. I know. Then she reached for the door handle. Let's make sure the truth happens first. I stepped out into the street, the air cooler than it had been when I arrived. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from my mother. Diane, final seating chart is locked. Don't be late. I stared at the screen for a second, then slipped the phone back into my bag. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about where I was supposed to sit. I was thinking about where I would stand when everything finally came into the light. The morning of the wedding didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a deadline. I arrived earlier than I needed to. The venue was already half alive, vendors moving in coordinated patterns, adjusting centerpieces, checking lighting, testing microphones. Everything looked seamless from a distance. Up close, it felt tight, like every piece was holding its position just long enough. I stayed near the edge of the room at first, watching. A florist was arguing quietly with someone near the stage. Not loud enough to draw attention, but enough to notice. I moved closer without making it obvious. We're still missing the second transfer, the florist said under her breath. We can't release the full setup without confirmation. The coordinator smiled tightly. It's coming through. The guarantor has already approved. Guarantor. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. They were talking about me. I stepped back before they noticed I'd been listening. That word followed me as I moved through the space. Guarantor, not guest, not daughter. A contingency plan. My phone buzzed in my hand. Lila, I'm in the back dressing room. Everything okay? I typed quickly. Me vendors are already asking about payments. It's starting. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Lila. Then we don't wait too long. I looked up toward the entrance just as my mother walked in. Diane Gutierrez didn't rush. She never did. She moved through the room like everything was already under control, her posture straight, her expression composed. People greeted her with polite smiles, and she returned them with the kind of warmth that felt practiced. Performance, not emotion. Kennedy, she said when she spotted me. You're early. So are the payment issues, I replied. Her smile didn't disappear. It just thinned. Everything is being handled. By me, I said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to keep the conversation private. Don't start, she said. Not today. I'm not starting anything, I replied. I'm clarifying my role. You don't have a role beyond showing up and behaving appropriately. That's not what the contract says. A flicker crossed her face, quick controlled. Contracts don't matter if nothing goes wrong, she said. That's not how contracts work. Her jaw tightened. You're creating tension where there doesn't need to be any. I heard the florist asking about missing payments, I said. They're already looking for confirmation. That's standard. No, I said. That's pressure. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned in slightly. You will not make a scene, she said. There it was again. Not a request. An instruction. I don't need to, I said quietly. The situation is already won. She studied me, searching for hesitation. She didn't find any. Do you understand what you're risking? She asked. Yes. And you're willing to do that over a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, I said. It's documentation. That word landed harder than anything else I had said, because it removed emotion from the conversation, left only facts. Her gaze shifted slightly, calculating. Then Marcus appeared beside us, his energy sharper than usual. What's going on? He asked. Nothing, Diane said smoothly. Not nothing, I said at the same time. He looked between us, irritation building. Can we not do this? He muttered. People are watching. They should be, I said. His expression changed at that. What does that mean? It means this doesn't stay quiet just because it's inconvenient. Marcus exhaled hard, running a hand through his hair. Look, he said, lowering his voice. Whatever this is, can we just get through today first? That depends on what happens today, I replied. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Because I wasn't trying to keep things smooth anymore. I was trying to keep things clear. A vendor approached us, then young, nervous, holding a tablet. Hi, she said carefully. I just need a quick confirmation on the outstanding balance for the lighting package. She looked directly at me. Not at my mother. Not at Marcus. At me. Diane stepped in immediately. We'll handle that, she said. The vendor hesitated. I was told to confirm with the guarantor, she replied. The word landed in the air between us. Heavy, unavoidable. I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence sit for a second longer than was comfortable. Then I looked at the vendor. Can you send the full breakdown to the email on file, I asked. Yes, she said quickly. Do that, I said. I'll review it. Diane's hand tightened slightly around her clutch. That won't be necessary, she said. It will be, I replied. The vendor nodded and stepped away, clearly relieved to have a direction. When she was out of earshot, my mother turned back to me. You're overstepping. I'm fulfilling the role you assigned me, I said. Her expression hardened. "This is not the time." "It is exactly the time," I replied, "because this is when the consequences become real." Marcus looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. Maybe because he was starting to understand. Or maybe because he didn't want to. My phone buzzed again. "Lila, it's time." 2 words. Simple. Final. I slipped the phone back into my bag and met my mother's eyes one more time. "You asked me not to embarrass the family," I said. "Yes," she replied. "I'm not going to," I said. A pause. Then more quietly, "I'm just not going to protect a lie." Something shifted in her expression then. Not panic, but the realization that control was no longer guaranteed. I turned and walked toward the back of the venue where the dressing rooms were. Each step felt steady, not rushed, not uncertain. Behind me, I could feel the weight of everything that had been built on assumption, on silence, on the belief that I wouldn't act. But I was already moving, and whatever happened next wasn't going to be contained. The hallway leading to the dressing rooms was quieter than the main hall, carpeted, muted. The noise from the reception area softened into a distant hum, laughter, glassware, music checks. It felt like stepping behind a curtain where the performance hadn't started yet. Lila's door was slightly open. I knocked once anyway. "Come in," she said. She was standing in front of the mirror, half-dressed, the gown unzipped in the back. One of the bridesmaids was adjusting the hem, but stepped aside when she saw me. "I'll give you a minute," the bridesmaid said, slipping out and closing the door behind her. For a second, it was just the 2 of us. "You okay?" Lila asked. "Yes," I said. She gave a small, tired smile. "Ask me in an hour." I nodded. That felt honest. I set my bag down on the small table by the window and pulled out the envelope. She watched me, her expression focused, not nervous, just prepared. "I brought everything," I said. "Me too," she replied, reaching for her phone again. We stood there for a moment, the weight of what we were about to do settling into the space. Then she spoke. "I've been thinking about how this plays out," she said. "Not just emotionally, logistically." "Same," I said. She nodded once like that confirmed something. "If we do this before the ceremony," she continued, "it disrupts everything immediately." Vendors pause. Guests notice. My parents step in. "And your mother will try to smooth it over," I added. "Exactly," she said. "She'll frame it as a misunderstanding, something that can be handled quietly. That's what my mother is counting on too." Lila crossed her arms, thinking. "But if we wait too long," she said, "it looks like we're reacting instead of revealing." "That matters," I agreed. "Because this isn't a reaction. It's documentation." She glanced at the envelope in my hand. "Then we need a moment that forces attention," she said, without looking staged. I thought about the flow of the ceremony, the order, the expectations. "There's a window," I said, "right before you walk down the aisle." She looked up at me. "Everyone's already seated," I continued. "All eyes forward. Vendors locked in. No one expects interruption. And if something stops it there," she said slowly, "it can't be ignored. It also can't be rewritten later," I added. She let that sit for a second, then nodded. "Okay, no hesitation, just a decision." "Who speaks first?" she asked. "You," I said. "It's your wedding, your moment. And I back it up," I replied, "with documents." She exhaled long and steady. "This is going to change things," she said. "Yes, with my parents. With yours. Yes, with everything after today." I met her eyes. "That's already happening," I said. "We're just choosing not to pretend it isn't." She held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded again. There was a knock on the door. 5 minutes, a voice called from outside. Lila didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the table and picked up the envelope from my bag. She didn't open it, just held it for a moment like she was measuring the weight of it. "Do you trust me?" she asked. It wasn't a casual question. It wasn't about friendship. It was about alignment. "Yes," I said. She handed the envelope back. "Good," she said. "Because once we start this, we don't stop halfway." "I'm not here to stop halfway." A small smile touched her lips, brief but real. "Neither am I." Another knock. "Lila, we need you," someone said, more urgent this time. She turned toward the mirror, adjusting the front of her dress with practiced hands. Then she looked back at me. "When I step out there," she said, "they'll expect me to follow the script." "They always do," I replied. She picked up her bouquet from the counter. "Let's give them something they can't script." I stepped back as she moved toward the door. She paused just before opening it. "One more thing," she said without turning around. "What if your mother tries to shut this down?" "She will," I said. Lila nodded slightly. "Then we make sure she can't," she finished. The door opened. Sound rushed in, music, voices, movement. The hallway was no longer quiet. The moment had started. I followed a few steps behind her, not close enough to be obvious, but close enough to stay in position. As we reached the edge of the main hall, I could see guests taking their seats, the officiant standing ready, cameras being adjusted. Everything was set. Everything was waiting. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from my mother. "Diane. Where are you? Sit down. Now." I didn't reply. Instead, I looked up at the aisle, at the place where everything was supposed to go exactly as planned, and I realized something simple. This wasn't about stopping a wedding. It was about stopping a lie before it became permanent. The music shifted. The signal. Lila took her first step forward, and I knew in a matter of seconds everyone in that room was about to see something they weren't prepared for. The music started. Soft at first. Controlled. The kind of orchestral swell that tells everyone to turn to focus, to expect something beautiful. Every head in the room shifted toward the aisle. Lila took 3 steps forward, then stopped. At first, no one reacted. People assumed it was part of the timing. A pause, a breath. But she didn't move again. The music continued for a few seconds too long before someone signaled to lower it. A ripple moved through the room, confusion, then attention. "Is everything okay?" the officiant asked gently, his voice carrying just enough to reach the front rows. Lila didn't look at him. She turned instead slightly deliberately toward where my mother was standing. Toward me. "I need a moment before we continue," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The room went still. My mother stepped forward immediately, her smile already in place. "Of course," Diane said, light and controlled. "Weddings can be overwhelming." "This isn't about nerves," Lila interrupted. The smile didn't drop, but it stopped reaching my mother's eyes. "What is it about, sweetheart?" Diane asked. Lila took a step away from the aisle, turning fully now so more of the room could see her. "It's about transparency," she said. That word landed differently than anything else that morning. Not emotional, not dramatic. Clear, measured, and impossible to soften. I stepped forward, then not beside her, but close enough that the connection was obvious. A few guests started whispering. "What's going on? Is this part of it? It doesn't look like it." My mother's gaze flicked to me, sharp, warning. "Kennedy," she said quietly, "this is not the time." I didn't respond, because for the first time, timing wasn't hers to control. Lila continued. "Before I walk down that aisle," she said, "there's something I need everyone here to understand." Her parents stood now, confusion written across their faces. Lila, her mother, started. "It's okay," Lila said gently. "I just need a minute." Then she looked back at me. A small nod. I opened the envelope. The sound of paper sliding free seemed louder than it should have been. In the past few months, Lila said there have been financial arrangements made for this wedding that were not fully disclosed to all parties involved. The room shifted again, this time less whispering, more focus. My mother stepped closer. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice still calm but tighter now. "Everything has been handled properly." "That's what I was told too," I said, and that was the first time I spoke. Not loudly, but clearly enough that the front half of the room heard me and the rest followed. Diane turned toward me fully now. "You're misunderstanding the situation," she said. "No," I replied. I wasn't given the situation to understand. A pause. Then I held up the first document. "This is a contract I signed," I said, under the impression that it was a venue formality. I didn't rush, didn't over-explain. I let the words sit. And this, I continued, is what it actually is. I turned the page slightly enough for the closest rows and the cameras to see the heading. Primary financial guarantor. A murmur moved through the room. Low. Uneasy. "What does that mean?" someone whispered. "It means," I said steady, "that if anything in this wedding fails, payments vendors disputes, the financial responsibility falls entirely on me." Silence. Then louder whispers. "That can't be right. Why would she? Did she agree to that?" My mother stepped forward again, faster this time. "That's a misinterpretation," she said. "These documents are standard in complex event planning." "Then why isn't your name on them?" I asked. That stopped her. Just for a second. But long enough. I held up another page. "Every liability clause points to me," I said. "Every financial risk, every penalty." I looked at her directly. "You told me it was a formality." Her expression didn't crack, but it shifted. "From control to calculation." "You signed it," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Based on what you told me it was." "That's not how contracts work." "No," I said. "But that is how misrepresentation works." That word landed heavier than anything else. Misrepresentation. Legal, specific, not emotional. Lila stepped closer beside me. "I've seen the email threads," she said, "between Diane and the vendors." Now the room changed. Not just confused. Alert. "Emails?" her father asked. Lila nodded. They confirmed that Kennedy was positioned as the financial guarantor without being fully informed of the scope. Her mother looked between them. "Diane," she said slowly, "is that true?" My mother didn't answer immediately, and that more than anything shifted the balance, because silence from her meant something. I lowered the documents slightly, not hiding them, just no longer needing to prove their existence. "They expected me not to question it," I said, "not to read closely, not to push back." I looked around the room, not at everyone, just enough to make the point clear. Because I usually don't. That was the truth. And it landed. Not as weakness, as context. Lila took a breath. "I'm not comfortable continuing this ceremony without addressing it," she said. The officiant stepped back slightly, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Guests were no longer whispering quietly. They were watching, waiting. My mother finally spoke again. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said. "We can discuss it privately after the ceremony." "No," I said. "Not louder. Just final." "Because if something goes wrong today," I continued, "I'm the one legally responsible. Not later. Not in private. Today." That shifted the conversation again. from embarrassment to risk. Real immediate risk. The kind people couldn't ignore. Lila's father stepped forward now. "Is there any chance this is accurate?" he asked, looking directly at Diane. Another pause. Another calculation. And then for the first time, my mother didn't have a clean answer, which was answer enough. The room didn't explode. It didn't turn chaotic. It did something quieter, more dangerous. It stopped trusting the version of events it had been given, and in that stillness I realized something had already changed. We weren't asking for the truth anymore. We were holding it in the open, and no one, not even her, could put it back where it had been. No one told the guests to leave. No one announced a break. But the ceremony paused. Not formally, just enough that the energy shifted from celebration to something more deliberate. Conversations lowered. Chairs scraped softly as people turned toward the front instead of the aisle. Lila's father stepped closer to us, his expression no longer confused, just focused. "I think we need to step somewhere private," he said. My mother opened her mouth immediately. "Yes, that would be best," Diane said. "This isn't appropriate for—" "No," Lila cut in, her voice still calm but firmer now. "We're not moving this to a back room where it can be minimized." Her father hesitated for a second, caught between instinct and what was unfolding in front of him. Then he nodded once. "Then we handle it here," he said. That was it. The line shifted. A wedding became a negotiation. A performance became a record. A woman in a navy suit stepped forward from the side, someone I hadn't noticed before. Rachel Kim, she introduced herself. Her voice professional, measured. "I'm counsel for the venue and event services. Of course there was a lawyer on site. At an event structured like this, there always would be. I've been asked to clarify any contractual concerns." She continued, looking between Lila, her parents, and finally me. My mother exhaled softly as if relieved. "Perfect," Diane said. "Then we can put this misunderstanding to rest." Rachel didn't respond to that. Instead, she turned to me. "You are Kennedy Gutierrez?" she asked. "Yes." "And you believe you are listed as the primary financial guarantor under the event agreement?" "I don't believe it," I said. "I have the contract." I handed her a copy. She scanned the first page quickly, then flipped through the sections with practiced efficiency. Her expression didn't change, which in its own way said everything. "This document does list you as the primary guarantor," she confirmed. A ripple moved through the room again. Louder this time. My mother stepped forward, her tone tightening. "That doesn't mean what she's implying," Diane said. "These agreements are layered." Rachel raised a hand slightly. "Let me finish," she said. It wasn't rude, but it was final. Diane stopped talking. Rachel continued scanning, pausing briefly at the liability clauses, then the addendums. "Under these terms," she said, "the guarantor assumes responsibility for any outstanding balances, penalties, or disruptions related to the event." She looked up at me. "That includes non-payment vendor disputes or cancellations triggered by reputational concerns." Reputational concerns. The phrase hung in the air, meaning, Lila said quietly, if this wedding is disrupted, she pays. "Yes," Rachel said. There was no hesitation in her voice, no softening, just fact. Lila's mother stepped closer, her face pale now. "Diane," she said, "why would Kennedy be in that position?" My mother's composure held, but only just. "It was a strategic decision," she said, "to streamline the process." At her expense, Lila's father asked. "It's not an expense if nothing goes wrong." "That's not an answer," he said. Rachel turned a page. "There's an additional point," she said. Everyone went quiet again. "The guarantor retains the right to review and approve any financial obligations tied to the contract," she continued. and under certain conditions may challenge enforceability if the agreement was entered under misrepresentation or incomplete disclosure. I felt that land not just in the room, but in me, because hearing it out loud made it real in a way reading it hadn't. Lila looked at me. "Can you prove that she asked?" I didn't hesitate. Yes. I pulled out the printed emails Lila had shown me the day before and handed them to Rachel. "These were not disclosed to me at the time I signed," I said. "They show intent to assign liability without full explanation." Rachel read them carefully, slower this time, more deliberate. My mother watched her, not speaking, not interrupting, because she knew this wasn't something she could talk her way out of. After a moment, Rachel looked up. "These communications suggest that the scope of liability may not have been clearly presented to the guarantor at the time of signing," she said. "Carefully worded, but clear." "So what does that mean?" Marcus asked, his voice tighter than before. Rachel turned slightly toward him. "It means," she said, "that Ms. Gutierrez may have grounds to contest her obligation under this agreement. May have grounds, not a guarantee, but enough. Enough to shift everything." My mother stepped forward again, faster now. "This is being escalated unnecessarily," she said. "We can resolve this privately after the ceremony." "No," I said. She looked at me sharply. "You're not thinking clearly." "I am," I replied, "for the first time in this situation." Her expression hardened. "You would jeopardize this entire event." I held her gaze. "I would protect myself from a contract I didn't fully agree to. That's the same thing." "No," I said. "It's not." Silence stretched between us. Not empty, decisive. Lila stepped forward again, her voice steady. "If Kennedy withdraws as guarantor," she said, "what happens to the event?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "Without a valid guarantor," she said, "vendors may suspend services until financial responsibility is reassigned or secured. In other words, everything could stop. Right here, right now." Lila absorbed that, then nodded slowly. "Then we pause," she said. Her parents looked at her. Lila, her mother, started. "I'm not walking down that aisle," she said, "until this is resolved transparently." There it was. The moment, not explosive, not dramatic, just final. My mother's control, built on timing, pressure, and silence, collapsed in a single decision she couldn't override. "You're making a mistake," Diane said quietly. Lila met her eyes. "No," she said. "I'm correcting one." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to, because the power had already shifted from assumption to consent, from control to choice. I looked down at the documents in my hand, then back up, at the people watching, at my mother, at everything that had been built on the idea that I wouldn't push back. "I'm formally withdrawing from any financial responsibility under this agreement," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I'll be filing notice based on misrepresentation." Rachel nodded once. "Understood," she said. And just like that, the role I had been quietly placed into no longer belonged to me. The room didn't empty right away. People stayed where they were, some seated, some standing, like no one wanted to be the first to move and miss whatever came next. But nothing explosive happened. No shouting, no scene, just recalibration. Vendors gathered in small clusters, speaking quietly into headsets or checking their phones. The coordinator stepped aside with Rachel Kim, both of them reviewing something on a tablet. Lila's parents moved closer to her, their attention fully on their daughter now, not the event. And my mother stood still, not frozen, just without direction for the first time. Marcus shifted beside her, glancing at me, then away. like he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start anymore. I stepped back from the center of the room, giving space where it wasn't mine to fill, because this part wasn't about me speaking. It was about what happened after I stopped. "Ms. Brooks," Rachel said a few minutes later, addressing Lila directly, "the vendors are requesting confirmation on how you'd like to proceed." Lila looked at her parents, then back at Rachel. "What are the options?" she asked. If a new guarantor is assigned and approved, Rachel explained, services can continue with minimal disruption. Otherwise, elements of the event may be paused or reduced. In other words, someone else would have to take the risk. Not just financially, reputationally. Responsibility wasn't abstract anymore. It was visible. Her father exhaled, slowly processing. "We'll handle it," he said. Not to the room, to Lila, to Rachel, to himself. Rachel nodded. "Then we'll begin the reassignment process." That was it. No ceremony resumed. Not immediately. But the wedding didn't collapse either. It adjusted. Like everything else in that room. I turned to leave before anyone stopped me. Not because I needed to escape, but because I wasn't needed in that space anymore. "Kennedy." I paused. Lila caught up to me just outside the main hall, her dress gathered slightly in one hand. "Thank you," she said. I shook my head. "You didn't need me to do that," I replied. "You already knew something was wrong. I needed someone willing to stand there with me," she said. That landed differently. Not as gratitude, as acknowledgement. "I hope this didn't cost you more than it needed to," she added. "It didn't," I said. "It cost exactly what it was supposed to." She studied my face for a second, then nodded. "Are you staying?" she asked. I glanced back toward the hall. "No," I said. "This part isn't mine," she smiled faintly. "Fair." There was a brief pause. "Then I'd like to stay in touch," she said. "After all of this settles." "Me too," I replied. And I meant it, because what had started as something transactional had become something honest. She squeezed my hand once quick and grounding, then turned back toward the hall. I walked the other way. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, just clearer. My phone buzzed before I reached my car. "Marcus." I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Yeah," I said. There was a pause on the other end. "I didn't know," he said. "I believe," I replied. Another pause. "Mom's not handling this well." "That's not my responsibility," I said. He exhaled quietly. "I know." For a second, it felt like he wanted to ask for something. Forgiveness, understanding, a way to smooth it over. But he didn't. "Are you coming back?" he asked instead. "No," I said. Okay. That was it. No argument, no pressure, just acceptance. We hung up. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, not shaking, not tense, just still. I thought about the contract, the envelope, the way my name had been used like a solution to a problem I didn't create, and how easy it would have been to stay quiet, to get through the day, to deal with the consequences later. That version of me existed. She had for a long time. But she wasn't the one who walked into that room, and she wasn't the one walking away now. A few weeks later, everything settled the way things usually do when the truth has already been said out loud. The legal process moved forward, slow, structured, predictable. With the documentation in place, the challenge to the contract held. My name was removed from any financial obligation tied to the event. Quietly, efficiently, exactly the way it should have been from the start. My mother didn't call. She sent one message. "Diane, I hope you're satisfied. I read it once, then archived it. Not out of anger, just clarity. Satisfaction wasn't the point. Neither was revenge. What I felt wasn't victory. It was something simpler. Space. I moved apartments shortly after. Nothing dramatic, just a smaller place closer to work with windows that let in more light in the mornings. I kept the dress, not because of the wedding, but because of what it represented. Choice, not perfection, not approval, just mine. Sometimes I still think about that moment in the aisle, the pause, the shift, the second where everything could have gone one way and didn't. And I don't think about it as the day a wedding was interrupted. I think about it as the day I stopped carrying something that was never mine to begin with. There's a difference between standing up for yourself and trying to get even. For a long time, I thought they were the same. Because when you've been overlooked, dismissed, or quietly used, the idea of justice can feel like it has to be loud to matter. But it doesn't. Sometimes it's a document placed on a table, a sentence said at the right time, a boundary held without apology. What happened to me wasn't about a dress or a wedding or even money. It was about assumption, the belief that I wouldn't question, wouldn't push back, wouldn't choose differently if I saw the full picture. And the truth is, I almost didn't. Not because I couldn't, because I had been taught not to. If you've ever been in a position where your role in a family felt predefined, where helping slowly turned into carrying more than you agreed to, you'll understand how hard it is to see the line, and even harder to redraw it. Setting boundaries isn't revenge. It doesn't undo what was done. It doesn't erase the history. What it does is change what happens next. And sometimes that's enough. If this story resonated with you, I'd really like to hear your perspective. Where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? I read every comment even when I can't reply to all of them. And if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself, you're not alone. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.